In today's video, I'll be sharing why I decided not to study abroad during university. Study abroad experiences still aren't quite as popular as I believe that they should be, especially in countries like the United States, where a lot of people don't even have a passport. But there's a reason that I decided not to study abroad even though I had the opportunity and I knew about the options that existed for me. So I decided I wanted to study in London or possibly Scotland in Edinburgh. It changed thereafter when I thought I was more interested in learning the Japanese language, so I would want to study in Japan. And I really pursued that for a lot of years and actually studied East Asian studies for my entire first year of university, and then slowly realized, wait, this isn't exactly what I want to do with my life. It's interesting, but it's not something I can spend that much time on. So I was really very lost. And when it came to study abroad, I realized, okay, if I'm switching where I'm going to go and I'm actually going to go back to Edinburgh, that became my first choice again. I need to take it very, very seriously because it's very expensive. Study abroad can definitely be less expensive if, for example, you come from Germany and you're not paying tuition there. You pay your local tuition rates and you can study abroad in a country that's actually super expensive in terms of tuition, like the United States or England. So in my case, I have a very average tuition fee, I would say. In Canada, at the University of Toronto, it was around $7,000 to $8,000, and I was receiving help from my parents, just to be perfectly upfront. So it wasn't cheap, but it was reasonable considering our next door neighbor, the US, where you can pay $30,000 to $40,000 a year. What became an issue is the cost of living in Edinburgh. So not only do you have to pay to fly there, but you have to pay to live there, and living on residence or locally still ended up costing me an estimated $20,000. That's what the University of Toronto was telling me, is that including, I believe, my tuition, it was going to cost anywhere from $18,000 to $24,000. So the risks became very high when I looked at that amount of money, and I thought to myself, at the University of Toronto, I don't know for sure what I want to study. I'm kind of trying out things here and there. I always studied history. I was interested in political science and that sort of thing, but it was very unclear what my path was. And to experiment that way in Edinburgh, where I would be investing even more money into that experimental phase, really put me off the idea. So I wanted to look for alternatives. And pretty quickly, I realized that not every country in the world or every school system in the world requires you to already have your bachelor's degree to work in schools abroad. Because as an English speaker or someone who speaks a native near level of English, even if you're not from an English-speaking country, you can find work fairly easily in a lot of countries around the world just because of the language you speak. As long as you're willing to take on responsibility and hopefully get a little bit of training, either a TOEFL certificate or just some on-the-job learning, to be able to actually deliver courses or at least conversational support. So I always knew that these sorts of programs existed because particularly my interest in Japan showed me the JET program, where people with a bachelor's degree but who were native speakers of English and had no real qualifications otherwise could become an English teacher and have government support to live there for the year. So I looked for similar programs and realized that there are places where you don't need that bachelor's degree first. Most of the time you have to have a high school degree, but I actually found a place where you could be, I believe it was the age of 16, because they're taking into consideration different school systems in English-speaking countries, including England, where they don't necessarily study to the age in high school that we would study in Canada. So it was quite flexible. You didn't need to talk about your education and your work experience you had, but I was able to apply to a program to become an English conversational assistant in Spain. So that program was called CAPS Home to Home. It was basically the idea of being a conversation assistant at that time, where you showed up and supported teachers in the classroom, giving kids experience conversing in English and learning more about English-speaking cultures. I believe the program has really expanded since then, where they actually have different options depending on if you're a qualified teacher, if you at least have a bachelor's degree, if you have a specialized bachelor's degree in linguistics. I believe that there's a whole different range of compensation depending on what your qualifications are. But at the time, it was very basic. You were a conversation assistant. And it's not the only program in Spain for teaching English as a foreign language. It was, however, the easiest one to get into at that point because I didn't have a bachelor's degree and I did not speak Spanish at that point. So the reason I started to pursue this program instead of looking at alternative schools for a study abroad is that you weren't paid for it, but you did receive a stipend It was, I believe, 200 euros a month at that point, and it has gone up since then. So it's not a large amount of money for an entire month. But you got free accommodation with a host family. So if you had a little bit of savings in addition to the stipend and having your accommodation covered and a lot of food, a lot of meals covered by that family as well, it was pretty reasonable. And I was not going to be borrowing nearly as much money to support me during that year as I would have during a study abroad. I think I ended up borrowing a couple $1,000s just because I hadn't had that much time to save in advance. So I pursued this program. I went through the interview process, and I was incredibly excited to get it. I had no real interest in Spain or Spanish-speaking countries before in particular, unlike, Britain, like I had expressed, or Japan, like I'd been studying, but I always loved Europe and European history, and I just got more excited about it the more I learned about it. So I really had an open mind, and if you're going to look to do a work abroad instead of a study abroad, then I would suggest doing the same thing. In the description box, I'll include links to different websites where you can search for English teaching options around the world. So you'll look based on your qualifications. You might have a country in mind, but be open to looking at other countries in the area, other countries that speak the same language if you're interested in learning the language, countries with a low cost of living, just countries that don't have the same bachelor's degree in particular expectations for new teachers, who are more flexible and open to an English native speaker who wants to learn how to teach and who's available to do so. So basically, I just recommend that you be open-minded and look for a work experience instead of necessarily a study abroad experience, especially if you're like me and you weren't quite sure what you wanted to study and if you wanted to switch, because it gives you time to explore a little bit more. Work experience really helps you figure out what you want to do in your actual working life. Doing really teaches you what you like to do. It's quite logical, but if you're a university student, you don't have much of that experience available. If you're low on funds, or you don't have a lot of time to save, or the particular program or country you've been looking at is very expensive, consider working abroad instead that year, because even if you make a stipend versus a full salary, at least it's something coming in and you'll be able to offset a little bit of those costs. If you want to take a big risk and kind of show up in the country and see what kind of work you can get, you can try a working holiday visa. A lot of countries have an exchange with Canada, and this is one way to go to an English-speaking country like Ireland or Australia are really, really popular destinations for working holiday visas if you're from Canada, or if you're from those countries and want to come to Canada. There's a lot of opportunity for basic work, like working in a restaurant, working as a bartender. I believe there's lots of farm opportunities in Australia, and I'm sure some of them exist in Canada too. So if you're just more working towards being in that country and having the experience for a year, and you don't really mind so much what work you're doing, considering you are still in university and you still have time to get that work experience, and you just need something to give you income for that year and something to put on a resume to show that you have worked, then I think it's worth it to give it a shot. So like I said, I got to try out a potential career teacher, and it was good that I tried it because that specific direction, teaching primary or teaching children in general, as much as I love teaching kids, it wasn't the main focus of what I wanted to do, because I felt that working in a classroom could be sort of restricting. Whereas working online, I can work with people of a variety of ages, but also get to work with technology and constant innovation and work for myself. So it gave me a chance to experiment and clarify what at least I did not want to do. And it really developed my interest in languages all over again, in a broader swath of languages, including Spanish and Catalan, because they speak that in the region that I lived. It also got me interested more in European history, more broadly than Britain and Italy, which had been my interest before. It really got me looking at other countries, understanding the layout of Europe, understanding their politics on a more personal level, and that's why I ended up switching into European studies the year that I got back. So it gave me a chance to experiment and realize that there actually was a major where I could combine my varied interests: political science, history, a little bit of economics, which wasn't the focus of my interests, general European issues like the European Union and how it works. It was a great way to combine all those interests with an interest in languages, and I wouldn't have even sought out that sort of major if I hadn't had that experience to show me or light up within me an interest in it. So I got back to school after that year, and it was still hard to transition back in, just like anybody who comes back from a study abroad. There's usually seminars that university will host talking about reverse culture shock and getting you transitioned back in. And you still have the remaining years, however long, of university that you do need to finish up. So it's not that that financial burden, let's say, is completely gone because you worked for a year. But you save money because you didn't study abroad. The tuition is the same as before. If you were lucky, you got paid enough, you could save a little bit towards it. You have more work experience to put on a resume so you can get a part-time job or get work in your university. You know that you're investing that money wisely because you've had more time to figure out the courses that you really want to take and specialize in. And there's always options to escalate your learning so that you graduate more or less on time anyway, which is what I did. I did graduate a semester late, but I was able to add extra courses into my schedule because I was really motivated in knowing what I wanted to learn. I was also willing to do some classes after work in the summers, so that way I could catch up with my peers. I really believe where there's a will, there's a way. And the key to working abroad was that I needed to find that will. And afterwards, I was able to find a way to make it through university with a much better sense of my identity, with an incredible experience under my belt, having the confidence to keep exploring after I graduated. I didn't have as much of a financial burden, and the time I spent in university was a lot more joyful because I was really convinced about why I was there. So all in all, I definitely recommend a gap year during university, or potentially before, or potentially after before you enter the workforce. However, I don't think it needs to be a classic study abroad situation. You can take time off to work, and I strongly recommend that you go somewhere during that time, even if it's just a different city, or a different province, or state, or territory. But even better if you can go to a country where there's a new language for you to learn, where there's a new culture for you to learn about, because you really get to grow as a person and get to grow in terms of your social skills. Even if you don't have that option, or it's not really appealing to you to leave your friends and family for a year, it's still okay, I believe, to take that year off if you need to get clear on what you want to be studying in university and what you want to do afterwards. Just make sure you have a timeline and you know the steps for getting back into school, because you do not want to be derailed. So what did you do in your case? Did you study abroad? Did you work abroad? Have you taken a gap year? Are you thinking about it and still don't know exactly what you want to do? Share in the comments below and we can definitely share ideas and give recommendations. As always, thanks for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in how to live and learn more creatively. I also do videos about how to teach more creatively if you're in the e-learning industry. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time on the Intrepid Emma YouTube channel. Bye!